On this week's episode of 5 Films, we have Nick Adamson. Nick is a filmmaker who runs M62 Films, and they curate and create a whole host of content devoted to Northern filmmaking.
My number one is The Dirties, which is a Canadian mockumentary about two filmmaking film sort of nerds who were bullied by a gang called the Dirties, and they decide to get their revenge by making a film featuring them unknowingly, and which they're going to show in front of the class to humiliate them. But things go a bit awry when the teacher sees a rough cut of the film and sees that they've been killing them in comedic ways in film. So all that's cut, and the film gets shown, and they're humiliated instead of the other way around. And then things take a darker turn when one of them suggests that they make a sequel with real guns. So, yeah, it's a film by a first-time director, but he'd been working on a YouTube series for some time, a comedy YouTube series, and it comes across in the film because the sort of relationship between the two characters is so natural and funny, and the banter. It's a really hilarious film until things get a bit more complex. And I just really like it for that. I like that sort of thing where you can suddenly be jolted out of your laughter. This is one of the themes I think that turns up in my choices. My number 2 is Lava. No, I've not been eating burritos. Lava. It's another first-time director, but this guy was actually an actor. His name, Joe Tucker. You may know him from small parts in a few Mike Leigh films. And I think the last time we saw him, he was getting strangled by Tom Hardy in Bronson for being a bit of a PDF file. So back in 2001, he directed this film, Lava, and he plays this strange character called Smiggy, who claims to have a military background. There's no evidence that you see in the film of this. And he goes on a revenge mission with the trolley boy from the local supermarket, who he happens to live in a grotty green B&B with. And so it's another film that's very funny but very dark at the same time, and it quite a lot of it happens in one room. I don't know if it was originally written as a play and he sort of spiced it up, but it sort of feels like that. Everyone's in this one room and things just keep getting more and more absurd, but the characters don't seem to notice. It's one of those films where everything's so casual, but it just keeps getting stupider and stupider. And it has the play element is the just ridiculous dialogue. I can't remember much of it now, except for there's one scene where someone gives a tearful confession about their brother being beaten into a wheelchair at the local amusement arcade, and he says something like, "And we'd only gone there to play intergalactic Ram Raiders." So it's full of strange one-liners like that, and it's funny, but it's very dark, and I'm not just saying that because Dirty Den turns up. Oh, he's even on the back. Oh yeah, this one, I don't know anyone else that's seen this, even though I've been going on about it for about 10 years. So number 3 is Computer Chess, which is it's maybe not the most obscure film, but it's, I think, the weirdest, which is the appeal for me. Because Andrew Bajolski started off making mumblecore films, and then he's moved into the mainstream, and he makes kind of mumblecore films with known actors, but in between all that, he made Computer Chess, which is let me just see how it explains it, because in my head it's just a mess. So Computer Chess takes place in the early 90s over the course of a weekend conference where a group of obsessive software programmers have convened to pit their latest refinements. They're playing computer chess, basically. They've all met up. It's 1980, and it's shot on like cameras of that period. And the thing that's crazy about it is not only why did this guy make this film, but when you watch it, you're like, is this actually a documentary? You're fairly certain it's not, but there are people in the cast that aren't actors. And there's a British guy in there who is actually an expert on this sort of stuff. But they're talking about it in 1980 as if they're in 1980, and they're arguing passionately about things that were like only relevant for 6 months in 1980. And you're like, how is this? What is this? Why does this exist? And then also in the hall next to where all these, shall we say, sexually inexperienced people are, there's a special meeting of swingers. They have a longer-winded way of saying it, but they're swingers, and they're sort of mingling and hanging around these people who are arguing about computer chess. And then it starts to get a bit more sci-fi and strange, and the whole time you're just like, what is this? I don't know why this exists. Did this guy like just find a video in a flea market somewhere and go, I'm going to take all that dialogue and put it in a film? Because that's how it feels. It's like it feels so real that it has to be, but it isn't. It's just, and I don't understand what it's trying to say or do either, because it just starts, there is some talk of AI in there, which might make more sense now because there's more of a conversation about it, and it's not maybe wasn't something that I'd thought about that much the last time I watched it. But yeah, it's one of those films where you just, I don't know what just happened, but then a few weeks later you're still thinking about it, and you're like, I'm gonna have to go again, aren't I? I'm gonna have to do it again until it makes sense to me. It's one of those ones. So yeah, I highly recommend that. So for number 4, I thought I'd throw horror in there. We're still sort of sticking with the making jokes during intense scenes sort of thing. It's a comedy horror, but it's one that's, I find that a lot of comedy horrors are like taking the mickey out of horror, and I don't think it works. It's been done so many times, hasn't it? But this is one of those where it does strange things with horror, because there's a mystery to it, and you're not sure if it's a ghost story or a slasher. So it's messing about with it, but then there's also just jokes as well, sometimes during the intense moments. So the plot is a sort of a wayward woman gets into trouble and is put on house arrest, and she's stuck in the house with her nagging, blabbering mother, and something that doesn't like her being there. So there's sort of they're kind of investigating this without leaving the house, and there's a lot of strange things happen, and a lot of funny things happen. I don't have that much more to say about it. It's just a fun film. It's a fun horror film that, like, it messes about with horror. It's not a direct, I don't know. It's fun. Number 5. It's part of the Errol Morris collection, famous for Thin Blue Line and Werner Herzog Eats His Shoe. I wanted to end on a lighter note, but when I started looking into this film, it turns out to be dark as well. He originally went to a town called Vernon, Florida, because it had been nicknamed Nub City, because the locals had a penchant for removing fingers and limbs to get insurance payouts. I don't know why a certain area would just start doing that en masse. But as he started doing that documentary, he received some death threats, and he decided to not follow that route. So instead, what you get is just him spending whatever time he had left, because I guess he booked a hotel, whatever time he had left there, just hanging around with the locals and seeing what they had to say, which is generally very bizarre. It seems a strange area, but it's again, I think it's a film that people, well, it's a documentary, but it's one that people will say nothing happens. But I think everything happens. Just hearing people talking, going about their daily business, hunting turkeys, that sort of thing. I just love hanging out there when I've not got anything else to do, when I want to rest. I just want to take a trip to Vernon, Florida. Why not?